We are never truly abandoned. We are only forced to confront ourselves. Carl Jung. Do you remember the moment they walked away? That silence felt like a knife straight to the chest. No explanation, no final glance. Just you left with a shattered heart and 1,000 unanswered questions. And the cruelest part? It's not that they disappeared. It's that you started to believe, maybe I did something wrong. If I had needed less, maybe they would have stayed. What you don't realize is this: the one who left may have had an avoidant attachment style, which means they didn't walk away because you were too much. They walked away because they never learned how to stay. In the early days of no contact, you may cling to the idea that there's a magic formula, that every ex goes through the same stages: longing, regret, return. But reality is far more complex. A dismissive avoidant often feels relieved right after a breakup. They savor the freedom of regained independence. Meanwhile, a fearful avoidant might spiral into chaos, swinging between anxiety and avoidance, terrified of losing you, yet equally terrified of being close to you. If you don't understand this difference, you risk falling into the biggest trap of all, believing they came back out of love, when in fact, they came back out of fear only to repeat the cycle again. Stay with me, because in the next 15 minutes, I'll take you through the entire psychological journey an avoidant goes through during no contact, and most importantly, how you can finally stop losing yourself in that endless loop. You remember those first days after the breakup. Every morning you'd wake up and reach for your phone, checking if they posted something new. Every story they shared on social media felt like a knife twisting deeper into your chest, and you couldn't help but wonder, do they miss me? Will no contact make them realize how important I am? That haunting obsession is something almost all of us go through. But the harsh truth is this: the answer depends entirely on their attachment style. In a survey, results showed 67% believed their ex had dismissive avoidant traits: distant, overly self-reliant, emotionally unavailable. 20% believed their ex was fearful, avoidant, torn between craving closeness and fearing vulnerability, which means nearly 90% of exes fall into these two categories. And that means their psychological journey during no contact will look very different. If you don't understand this distinction, you'll make the mistake of applying a one-size-fits-all formula. You'll believe they all eventually go through the same cycle of longing, regret, and return. But in reality, how an avoidant reacts in no contact reflects their deep, unresolved attachment wounds you didn't cause and can't control. For the dismissive avoidant, those first days after a breakup aren't painful at all. They often feel relieved. They may even enter a second honeymoon with themselves, enjoying freedom and independence, no longer feeling pressured by emotional demands. In contrast, the fearful avoidant is more likely to collapse, engage in reckless behaviors, and swing chaotically between wanting to come back and wanting to run away. So you see, right from the very beginning, these two styles step into no contact with completely opposite mindset. And that's why, if you're sitting there desperately waiting for the day they'll wake up and miss you, you may be gambling your heart in a psychological game whose rules you don't even know. You see it now. Right from the starting line, the two avoidant attachment styles react in completely different ways during no contact. And if we really want to understand how a dismissive avoidant operates, we need to walk through the 5 psychological stages they usually go through. Because in this journey, you'll realize every silence, every small signal, every action they take, none of it is random. It's driven by deep attachment wounds from their past. Separation elation. The joy of freedom. What shocks most people is that right after a breakup, a dismissive avoidant doesn't feel devastated like you might imagine. On the contrary, they feel relieved. That sense of freedom isn't because they never had feelings for you, but because the pressure of intimacy has temporarily lifted. According to Free to Attach, many avoidants after a breakup experience what's called a second honeymoon, a 6-8 week period where they feel like they're 18 again, diving back into personal hobbies, friends, or even a party phase. To them, getting their independence back equals rediscovering their identity. And here's the crucial part. During this time, if you chase, plead, or try to pull them back in, you only reinforce their belief that leaving was the right decision. R. Feelings bubble up. Emotions begin to surface. But that honeymoon doesn't last forever. After weeks of enjoying their so-called freedom, the emotions they buried start to rise again. Memories of you, the connection you shared, little moments of closeness, they begin to slip back into their mind. Yet dismissive avoidants don't know how to sit with these feelings. They don't allow themselves to grieve or process loss. Instead, they flip their defense system on suppression. They push those emotions back down, pretending they don't exist. But like bubbles underwater, the harder you push them down, the stronger they resurface. 3. Resuppression, the endless loop. This is the most chaotic stage. The dismissive avoidant falls into a psychological cycle. Feelings surface. They panic, suppress them. The feelings rise again. They push them back down. It's like living in a state of half awake, half numb. On the outside, they may appear calm, detached, or even indifferent. But on the inside, there's a constant tug of war. This back and forth explains their hot and cold behavior, sometimes sending small signals, other times disappearing completely. And if you're the one left behind, it's easy to misread this, to think, they must miss me. In reality, they're simply battling themselves. So, move on, the avoidant death wheel. Eventually, many dismissive avoidants choose what feels like the easier route. Move on to someone new. This is where they enter what's often called the avoidant death wheel, a toxic cycle avoidants repeat throughout their dating history. The pattern goes like this. They meet someone new who feels familiar or resembles you in some way. They get excited, telling themselves, this time will be different. Slowly, intimacy begins to feel heavy again. Their deactivation strategies kick in. Distance, withdrawal, and ultimately another breakup. This cycle can repeat for years. And the striking part is, avoidants don't usually jump immediately into a new relationship. They often wait a little while before moving on. But when they do, they're not truly searching for a new partner. They're searching for an escape from facing their true emotions. 5. Nostalgia. When missing you finally feels safe. And then the paradox begins. When you've truly gone silent, when you've disappeared from their world, when they've tested the waters outside and compared you to what's out there, that's when nostalgia kicks in. According to Free to Attach, avoidants only allow themselves to miss an ex once they feel safe. And what does safety mean? It means you're gone, you're not chasing, you're not demanding closeness. In that silence, their defenses no longer feel threatened, and the memories of you finally resurface without the pressure of obligation. This explains why many dismissive avoidants circle back months or even years later. But here's the truth you must hold on to. Nostalgia doesn't equal healing. Their longing doesn't necessarily mean they've learned how to commit. If boundaries aren't clear, the old cycle will repeat. So you see, the dismissive avoidance journey in no contact is a strange cocktail of relief, suppression, cycles, and delayed nostalgia. But not every avoidant walks this path. With the fearful avoidant, the script looks entirely different, more chaotic, more extreme, and far less predictable. And it's this very difference that makes understanding attachment styles the key to breaking free from the post-breakup spiral of pain. If the dismissive avoidant enters no contact with a sense of relief, the story for the fearful avoidant is far more tragic. They don't feel free, nor do they feel light. Instead, they fall into a state of complete shutdown, a collapse, both emotionally and behaviorally. 1. Complete shutdown. Right after the breakup, fearful avoidants often spiral into chaos. Heavy drinking, reckless dating, seeking fleeting thrills to fill the void. Some may even slip into self-destructive behaviors, desperate attempts to escape pain they can't put into words. This pattern traces back to childhood trauma. Many fearful avoidants grew up in environments filled with contradiction, craving love, while simultaneously fearing closeness because it once came with pain or abandonment. This paradox becomes the engine that drives their extreme reactions when relationships end. R. Feelings bubble up. Unlike the dismissive avoidant who can pretend for months that nothing happened, fearful avoidants swing back and forth very quickly. Within a short time, they already begin to miss you, as if sobering up from a reckless binge. But missing you doesn't mean they're ready to return in a healthy way. The longing comes laced with fear, fear of not being enough, fear of rejection if they try again. And so they wobble pulled between craving closeness and running from it. San, pendulum swing. This stage is often the most exhausting for anyone involved with a fearful avoidant. One day, they cling tightly, reaching out, sending affection. The next, they turn cold, distant, or disappear altogether. If you've ever loved a fearful avoidant, you know the feeling, like being in a relationship with two different people. On one side, a deep yearning for intimacy. On the other, a terror of being engulfed by it. They love then, they panic. They move closer, then retreat. The pendulum never stops swinging. 4. Attempt to move on. If you hold firm to no contact, the fearful avoidant will often attempt to move on. But even in a new relationship, they don't truly escape. They move forward, then pull back. On one hand, they want to prove they can love someone else. On the other, a heavy sense of guilt and a haunting belief of not being good enough keeps tugging them back. As a result, they often show up in others' lives as a shadow, never fully committed, never fully gone. 5. Nostalgia loop. When their emotions begin to stabilize, fearful avoidants slip into the nostalgia loop. This is when they start comparing new partners with you. They recall the beautiful moments, the laughter, the warmth, and spiral into what-if thinking. But instead of learning from the past, they repeat the same pattern, chasing the fantasy of a perfect partner, someone close enough to feel safe, but distant enough to never overwhelm them. Of course, that person doesn't exist. The result? Endless disappointment from one relationship to the next. So here's the truth. Both dismissive and fearful avoidants have their own journeys in no contact. The dismissive avoids feelings altogether, while the fearful swings wildly between craving and rejecting intimacy. Yet, they share one key similarity. Both only begin to truly miss you when they feel safe, when you are no longer chasing, no longer pleading, no longer available on demand. And that's the turning point. No contact isn't about making them miss you. It's about reclaiming your dignity, protecting your heart, and forcing them to face the real consequence of loss. After understanding the two avoidant attachment styles, dismissive and fearful, you may be asking yourself, so do they ever truly come back out of love, or only out of temporary nostalgia? Here's a truth that isn't easy to accept. Neither type will actually change unless they choose to grow up. For the dismissive avoidant, the process takes much longer. It can take months, sometimes even years, before nostalgia begins to creep in. And even when those memories resurface, their natural reflex is still to suppress and retreat. Missing you does not equal readiness to change. It only means they remember once they feel safe, once you are no longer within reach. The fearful avoidant, on the other hand, swings much faster. Within just a few weeks, they may already feel empty, reach out, and then withdraw again. But this back and forth is usually nothing more than the repetition of an old pattern. Cling, run, miss, fear, advance, retreat. And unless they develop genuine self-awareness and the courage to heal, that pendulum will keep swinging endlessly. Here's what you must remember. You cannot do the healing work for them. You might serve as a mirror, reflecting both their fears and their hidden desires. You might even spark the initial motivation, but true change, if it ever happens, must come from within them. Not from your chasing, not from your texts, not from your attempts to persuade. And this is the breakthrough. No contact is not a strategy to force them to recognize your worth. It is the way you force yourself to escape the cycle of chasing and emotional addiction. When you stop feeding your brain with dopamine hits from checking their stories or sending one more message, you are giving yourself the chance to detox, to regain clarity, and to reclaim the dignity that was eroded in the process of begging for love. And it's in that very moment when you stop, when you're no longer there as a backup option, that the paradox begins. The avoidant finally starts to feel the loss. So what really happens in their mind when you disappear. Let's move into the next part. Here's the paradox. When you truly stop, when you no longer chase, no longer text, no longer linger as if you'll always be available, that's when the avoidance brain finally reacts. At first, yes, they feel relieved. Silence feels safe. No pressure, no need to share, no emotional demands. But the human brain cannot bury emotions forever. Once the familiar reassurance disappears, those suppressed memories and feelings begin to surface. They start to think of you not because you reached out, but precisely because you didn't. They watch your stories. They drop vague signals, little breadcrumbs, just to test whether you're still there. But here's the truth. That's not love. That's fear. Fear of losing a backup option. This is where many people fall into a trap, mistaking breadcrumbs for signs of change. But no, if they have truly changed, they won't hide behind cryptic signals. They'll step out with responsible words and clear actions. Breadcrumbs are nothing more than a test to see if you're still available. What you need to understand is this. Your disappearance is what forces them to confront their real emotions. Not your texts, not your chasing. It's the silence that creates the space where nostalgia and regret can finally emerge. And while they wrestle with that internal chaos, you hold the golden opportunity to focus on yourself. No contact isn't just a tactic to make them miss you. It's a sanctuary for you to heal, to rebuild your self-respect, and to step out of the cycle of emotional dependency. Let me say this clearly. You are not broken just because someone didn't know how to love you. The wound you carry is not proof that you are too sensitive or not enough. It's simply a reminder that you had the courage to love deeply. And now, the silence you choose, no chasing, no begging, no lowering your worth, is the greatest gift you can give yourself. In that silence, you begin to hear your own voice again. You reclaim your value. You rediscover the unconditional love you've always owed yourself. Remember this, secure love doesn't begin with whether they come back. It begins with you when you set boundaries, when you say no to poor treatment, and when you choose healing instead of self-punishment. One day, when you look back, you'll see that no contact was never about losing. It was the doorway leading you to a new version of yourself, stronger, freer, and fully aware of your worth. And it's that version of you that deserves the safe, mature, and lasting love you've always longed for.